Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
Life.
Hello, good evening everybody. My name is Mel V, and tonight is the second episode of Dragonology. Today is April the 2nd, 2015, and I hope you're all settled in for a good evening of viewing, because this is going to be quite trying on the mind and the understanding. So I hope you can bear with us as we take this meander through some very interesting and very, let's say, thought-provoking moments this evening. Just tying in from where we left off last week with episode 1, a reminder of the expression by Philip K. Dick that the basic tool for the manipulation of reality is in fact the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of words, you can control the people who must use words. Control through language. Now, I hope many of you who have tuned in have gone through episode 1 and you'll get an idea of where we're going with this. But for those of you who haven't, this is pretty contained within itself. And I'm sure it doesn't take much of a stretch of imagination to understand that it is through language that we are controlled. And how we've come to understand this is through an examination of many symbols and languages across the world. And it's become abundantly clear that in order to know the truth about the nature of our reality, it is essential to examine our language and to get a grasp of what is going on and what it is that's actually being written and what's being said, the real intent and expression behind things. So many commonly used words and expressions have meanings other than what we are aware of. And symbolic lexicons represent words often masked within bigger concepts and bigger phrases, and often that masks other hidden meanings. All languages have root words, and this is very important to understand, is that these words within words, being root words, actually have a different meaning, which means that the word itself possibly has a different meaning or a different intention or origin. So all languages have root words which allude to an origin of said word, which has evolved from an original seed, thought, or intention. Now, what was that thought and what was that intention? This is what we have to consider here. Symbolism. Symbolism is the use of symbols, and it is universal to all cultures. Symbols are not just pictorial motifs, they are encoded into our language, particularly through the mode and application of rhymes, synonyms, and homonyms as symbolic indicators. Now, just to give you an idea of a commonly used rhyme, for example, when I lived in London, I became aware of something called Cockney rhyming slang. And a good example of that is how people would say, up the apples and pears, meaning they're talking about you going up the stairs. I'm going up the apples and pears. And that is actually two things I want to point out here. That is the use of synonyms, because apples and pears are synonymous with each other, okay? But it's also the use of elusive rhyming, because pears is the same as stairs. Well, they rhyme. So you're using synonyms and rhymes to allude to something. And this kind of Cockney rhyming slang is an idea of how we can illustrate what it is we're going to be talking about. In South Africa, that kind of Cockney rhyming slang sort of fell over to when I was a child, because I remember people saying, "Hello, my China." And it was a very common greeting in South Africa when I was a kid, for, like the guys to say to each other, "Hello, my China." And what they're actually referring to is the Cockney rhyming slang expression of "Hello, my China plate," meaning "hello, mate." And it got shortened to "Hello, my China." And actually, I do think they still use that sometimes in England, but when I lived there, I never heard them. That came specifically out of South Africa. So just to show you how this sort of symbolic expression, even within our own language, being English, has evolved, and how it is commonly used in different dialectics and contexts, and as an illustration of what we're going to be talking about today. Symbols hide the dragon. So we dive straight in here into what it's all about. Symbols most definitely do hide the dragon. The purpose of a symbol, a sign, or a synonym is to substitute the object with a symbolic counterpart. Adoption and use of symbols is universal to all cultures and are primarily used as a mechanism of subterfuge in order to hide the truth about the existence of dragons, which is the root of our very culture. Okay, and when I've spoken in the past, I said I've used specific colors for specific things. I always reference anything to do with ritual and cult practice in red, anything to do with language, writing, and reading in blue, and of course anything to do with the dragon will be in purple. And for those who watched last week, you understand, because the porphyro gentiae being the purple born. Symbols and etymology. In order to grasp the full extent of just how multi-layered symbolism interconnects, it's important to cross-reference these symbols with some of the etymological roots of our language. And this is where we're going to be going today. This is quite an vast and extensive context of work, so it's very difficult to go in a linear fashion. So just to bring us back to the beginning of where we were last week, when I said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. When we're talking about God or gods or royalty or rulers, in the context that I am dealing with regards to dragonology, we are always referencing dragons. And again, bringing in some of last week's work where I said we are renaming mythology dragonology, because dragonology is a more accurate description of this genre of information that we cover, simply because mythology limits the idea we can have about our history, because it basically limits it to one sort of religious practice, being Mithraism, of course, which evolved from many other religions before it, and incorporated many pantheistic and paganistic concepts into it. However, it's still very limiting and under the sort of Roman aspect, whereas there are so many other histories that are pretty much got the same template, tell pretty much the same stories about the same beings from all over the world, and that we are going to categorically prove through the course of this work. So just to take you again through some of part one's etymology, just to give us an understanding and a place to start from. First off, gods, royalty, or dragons, okay, are in the root word the. And I spoke about this a bit last week, but I want to pick up with the four key words we left off with, because the themes that come up with these four words keep reappearing again and again and again, okay? So this is the Greek, all right? Theotokos means the offspring of the gods, royalty or dragons. The porphyrogentius, as we spoke about last week, the porphyrogentius would be the Latin expression of Theotokos. Hemithoi, as in hemisphere, okay, half. Hemi means half. Half God, meaning demigod, half God or half human. Generally, what I would have considered to be the rulers and royalty of the planet. Okay, my favorite word, therianthropy, the ability to change shape into a human. Now, anthropy, okay, anthropology, obviously the study of cultures and humanity, but also if you think about the term anthropomorphize, commonly when you talk about an anthropomorphized sun, which is the sun with a face on it, that is what we're talking about, is something that's inhuman with human features. So what you're talking about here is a god that is able to take on human features, all right? Again, please try to remember these themes. They become very prevalent when you start looking. Theophania, okay? Now, that is a sudden appearance of God out of nowhere. So an incarnation out of supposedly thin air, or the disappearance, for that matter, of a physical incarnate being into seemingly nowhere. And the the root is obviously referring to, as you said, the gods, royalty, or dragons. But what's interesting, and we will bring this up today, and you'll see how the feign root ties into things. And feign is, of course, the root of the word phantom, which is a being which could supposedly incarnate out of nothing, or, you know, as a ghost. And again, that becomes very interesting because we'll get a bit more into that. Okay, so The is the gods, dragons, rulers, or royalty, and the interconnection between rulers and royalty and dragons is expressed in several ancient languages. And in fact, this is where the evidence that potentially the rulers and royalty of the world are in fact reptilian, as David Icke said. I know it's a far-flung theory, but when you start to actually look into the language and you see just how prevalent it is in so many different languages, this interconnection, it's pretty hard to ignore. So starting with one of the ones we picked up in last week's episode of Dragonology, and that is the interconnection between basilisk and basileus, which was demonstrated. The basilisk is historically documented as the king of serpents, and the word basileus is the ancient Greek language reference to king. Now we're going to start with some of the etymology that we've been touching on through the course of the week. Of course, I touched on this when I was gifted with a space at the round table over the course of the weekend, last weekend, and that is the root of pure, parla, and para. Now, these words transliterate with each other, but basically, ultimately have the same root, and there's a lot of evolutions of the word and rhymes of these words, which become very apparent and have some very telling themes about the nature of our reality. The Akkadian noun pure means snake. Now, pure relates to the Sanskrit title pala, which means king. Okay, pure, pala, para. That's the three root triad in this one that we're going to be focusing on. And this is an important serpentine word grouping and further reveals the dragon allegory interwoven into our language through root words and phrases. And again, the royalty ruler theme comes up here in the word pharaoh. Now, the pharaohs were known to wear, or depended on when the lower Egypt and Upper Egypt actually joined, the pharaohs began to wear both the cobra and the eagle. I beg your pardon, both the uraeus, which is the cobra, and I think that's an eagle. Yes, it is. But it actually represented the phoenix. And basically, this is a telling theme as well. We always find this sort of symbolism coming up in Egyptian dragonology. So pala and para feed into pharaoh, as you can see over here. And then, of course, where do these people live? They live in a palace. And that's no accident that it's also got the pala root in it. The residence of royalty and rulers, a palace. And I've taken this particular picture of Buckingham Palace because it'll become obvious when we start getting into architecture and I start talking about the Ophidian vibration, how it's locked down in architecture. Take a note of what Buckingham Palace looks like at the court where they do the changing of the guard. Okay, this is actually a painting by Lucas Cranach the Elder, and we will get into him at some stage because he actually, after a certain time, signed his work with a symbol of the dragon. And what's interesting to note is this half human, half serpentine being in the background here. But this is the Lucas Cranach depiction of paradise, and you might notice a little UFO up there, and interesting that. But Lucas Cranach is an interesting guy, definitely sponsored and funded by the black nobility and the church. But this is his depiction of paradise. And again, the word para is the root. The Edenic myth, the Garden of Eden is the origin of the concept of paradise. And of course, this is where you've got these little serpent beings coming along, and we will climb. I tell you, the one thing we cannot get away from, and we always come back to, is the Garden of Eden creational myth story with Adam and Eve. This theme just keeps coming back in everything I do. So keep an eye out for that one. We keep coming back to this. Serpentine control of language. All right, so when we talk about how you display language, for example, you would display language in a paragraph, or you would paraphrase something somebody said, or a parable is a story, often in symbolic allegory, that is told, for example, parables of the Bible. And parables were often told in rituals, and still are, as symbolic allegory, and sometimes acted out. And of course, ritual became the root of theater. And if you've ever seen one of these Masonic rituals that they do within the temples, it's, there's a lot of theatrics that go with it. Lines to be learned, people for their places to come in, but it's, quite a thing that they do. Okay, para is the root of the Indo-European expression parle, meaning to speak. And any of you that have seen the Pirates of the Caribbean Disney mind brain control episodes that have come out, or movies that have come out, I should say, you'll be aware of the plot where they spoke about parley. The pirate, when a pirate is captured, he has the right to declare parley, which is temporary protection until the captured party has an audience with the captain of the ship. And parley basically is a French expression as well, to speak. So para transliterates into narra, and the word narrate is taken from this. Okay, and again, we're talking about speak, we're talking about language. And this, again, narrate is taken from the Latin stem narra, meaning to tell. Narra is etymologically similar to naga, okay? And naga is a serpent-like god or dragon common in legends of countries such as Thailand, Cambodia, Java, Laos, Philippines. In fact, quite a bit of Indonesia. The naga theme is very prevalent. Now we're going to start talking, since we're talking about the naga, we're going to talk about another classification of dragon, which is the ifrit, or the ifrit, which sometimes spelled with a double E, afrit, but basically this is the Arabic classification for a malevolent demon or dragon. And it gives us the root word rit, okay? Ifrit, all right, gives us right, ritual, and of course, write, as in with a pen or with a typewriter or on a keyboard. So this gives you an idea of how even the dragon words are interwoven into the process of writing and performing the art of recording the language, okay, which we spoke about last week, how writing is intrinsically interlinked into ritual. So what do you call the Hebrew language in Hebrew? Judaic law equates the word ifrit with writing, and the modern Hebrew language is referred to as ivrit in Hebrew, and you can actually look this up. So even the Hebrew language is referred to as a word which is similar to ifrit, which is an Arabic classification of malevolent jinn or dragon or demon. Ifrit alludes to the Arabic verbal stem irif, meaning to know, and it's also the root of fraternity. So if you have knowledge or you are in the know, you're normally a member of the fraternity. The Latin word for brotherhood is fraternitas, and it's derived from the ifrit root. The ifrit's existence is concealed by the fraternity. And of course, I have deliberately used what would be a fraternity gathering of a ritualistic nature from the film Eyes Wide Shut. A lot of allegory there. Now, here's where we start to get into some interesting territory. Satan is the Arabic word for Satan is shaitani, and that parallels with the Arabic adjective shatir, meaning wise. But this is not the only language in which dragon-like beings are referred to as wise, or the ones who do the writing or talking or language. As we can see, and we spoke about last week, the goddess Sophia actually is a personification of wisdom, okay? And basically, Sophia has the Ophi root word in which we discussed in part 1. Or Ophi or Orpheus, for example, is a god with the root word in. But Ophi basically is a serpent root word. And what's interesting to notice is this particular statue, which I have actually seen, is outside the ruins of the library in Ephesus. And it's one of the few buildings that actually kind of have walls left in this amazing ruin. But There it is. And it's amazing that it's actually outside the library of all places that you find the statue of the goddess Sophia. And of course, be wise like serpents. Again, we see the patterns in the Arabic verb kafa, meaning to know, which is cognizant with afa, meaning viper in the Middle Eastern languages. And here's where it starts to get a bit funky, because you look at how the indoctrination element comes into this. Scolex is the Greek word for worm. And the word worm actually came from the Old English word worm with a U, which basically means serpent, snake, or reptile. Scolex corresponds with the Latin word schola, which means a lecture, sect, or followers. Scholar evolved into the English words school and scholar. A synonym for a good scholar is a genius. And the words gene, genius, and genie all stem from jinn. Now, jinn is the old Semitic word for jinn, or jinn with a J, DJ. In fact, if you were to go into hieroglyphics, the D and the J are actually displayed in hieroglyphics language, the old Egyptian language, as a cobra. So the J sound is distinctly jinn, jinn. It comes specifically from this particular root, this J sound, DJ specifically. And then, of course, it was transliterated and removed into just the J. But jinn are dragons from pre-Islamic Arabic history, and actually they do come up in Islamic history as well, because they're frequently mentioned in the Quran. And something I want to bring your attention to here is that actually if you go and read the translation of the 72nd surah, now surah is an important word, we will go on to that in a bit, and it means verse, okay? Now surat basically is verses of the jinn. Now, I want to talk about the word al, because we're going to deal with that in a little bit as well. Okay, Surat al-Jinn. So it's a 72nd surah is entitled Surat al-Jinn, lines or words or paragraphs or scriptures of the jinn. Now, Muhammad al-Fayed has actually said that the reason he changed his name from just Fayed to al-Fayed is because he is in fact descended from Egyptian royalty. And putting the L in front of his name defines that and indicates that. So that's very interesting to notice, because it also finds its way in front of the jinn. And I'll talk about what the L actually means in just a little bit. But Surah, Al, and Jinn are the very important things to understand here, because we go on to that in a second. And first we cover off the jinn. Jinn is the root of words such as, yes, origin. Listen to the connective themes here about the genesis, about our genealogy. Where do we begin? From genes. We talk about generations. Green comes from jinn, okay? And we will go on to discuss even the word plant alludes to the dragon when we start getting into the Melazine mythology. And of course, jinn, the alcoholic spirit. And we'll get on to explain how that is interesting as well. Patterns of connections between dragons and words. The pattern is repeated in the wordplay between the Arabic word surah, meaning verse, as I just spoke about, and the Greek word sauros, meaning reptile. So that's where you start to see the interplay between, again, language and dragon. The light theme starts to connect into the dragon and the language at this point. Here we go. Surah and Soros is rooted to the Semitic root word Sau, meaning light. And Saudi, and you often talk about, when you start looking into this, the Saudi priesthood, where you get the word sodomy and things like that, gets interesting. Of course, let there be light. The word Lucifer stems from the Latin expression Luxfer, meaning light bringer. So, of course, this is where the light theme continues. And the light theme continues to everything. Remember, we spoke last week about how the sun is always inextricably linked with dragon symbolism, or at least it is a masking of the dragon through its symbolic expression, I should say. Light and language. The word Lucifer is etymologically linked to Lesefer, meaning to tell. Think about when you use the expression, when you enlighten somebody, okay, you tell them something. So that's where we're going with this one. Knowledge is light, it's wisdom. And we've used the wisdom in this as well already. The words Lucifer and Lesefer share the same etymological roots with the words Sefer, meaning book, and Sofer, meaning writer or scribe. And then the word Sofer is etymologically linked to Sophia, which again we come back to. This is a personification of wisdom. It's amazing how many times you will always in the full circle of things end up back at Sophia and the creational myth. Very interesting. Keep an eye out for that. Of course, Sofer and Sophia are linked to philosopher and philosophy, again with the serpent root words present in those, but coming from the Ophi serpent root word. So you can see how they all interlink into each other. This is great. I love this. This is one of the most beautiful and most spectacular buildings I've ever been in. I've had the great pleasure of visiting Istanbul a number of times, including Biggie and I went there to Turkey for our honeymoon. And phenomenal building. I just wish that when I did explore the interior of this place that I knew as much as I knew now, because that was at least 15 years ago that, or 14 or so years ago that I was last there. But the Hagia Sophia is just an incredible building, and the interior of it's amazing. And it's an originally a Roman Catholic cathedral of sorts and became a basilica. But it's actually known in the Latin as Sancta Sapientia. And in Latin, serpens and meaning serpent is etymologically similar to sapiens, meaning intelligent. In fact, I have found interpretations of sapiens, which actually means serpent. And this is why I'm convinced when we talk about Homo sapiens, the word homo means the same as hetero means different. You like, for example, if you're heterosexual, you like the sexes that are different to you. If you're homosexual, you like the sexes that are the same as you. Homo sapien means the same. So if you talk about Homo sapien and this as the serpent representation, you're talking about the same as the serpent. So what does that mean? We've also got genealogy coming up in these dialects and through these word discourses. So a lot to think about here. What is this all saying? The word Hagia or Aya, I actually just call it the Hagia Sophia, is etymologically similar to Haya with a Y. And that actually means snake. So it's not just the Latin name, it's the English expression of the name of this particular basilica or cathedral in Turkey, which carries that root. Here we get onto some interesting roots. I spoke about this again on the round table. The collo root in Latin, the analogy between snake and dove is encoded into the etymological similarity between coluba, meaning snake, and columba, meaning dove. Kolu, kolo, kulu, kula, kala, and kali are all from this root, much like the pure Pala root. This we should consider to be a collection of root words that stem from ultimately the same root and can be found in many interesting places. But what I always found interesting is, and we will get into the columns now, if you notice the dragon wrapped around the column inside the Shenyang Imperial Palace. Dragons and columns are inextricably linked, and columns are everywhere. I don't know if you've ever noticed how many official buildings have columns outside of them, and there's a specific reason for that. Words from the same column root are colon, which is actually, that can be your colon, like in your intestines, which again is an object that's shaped like a serpent, a long organ, I should say. It's, serpent-like. And this thing over here is the colon monument in Barcelona. And basically it's celebrating the discovery and colonization of the world. There's various symbolic representations around that, around this entire monument. We have been there. And much like in Trafalgar Square, where Nelson's column is, there are also lines around it, which again are symbolic representations either of the sun or of the dragon, because through second degree, the dragon actually can be represented by the lion, because the lion can be a sun symbol, and the sun symbol always masks the dragon. But the words that come from that root are obviously colon, column. Again, you talk about writing a column in a magazine, so the writing theme comes in again. Colony, and this is the one that really bothers me, obviously, because of how the colonization has stripped the world of its beautiful indigenous cultures. Colonial, colloquial, which refers to the way in which we use terms within our native languages, or how we develop our language within our various communities. And then, of course, cloud. Clouds are often used to mask the dragon in artwork. You'll notice that there's a lot of clouds and in sculpture, particularly the Greek and Romans, and they're often used quite specifically as a representation of the dragon. And then, of course, color. And that will tie into when we start looking at artists and the art guilds, which were, of course, funded by the Black nobility families. College, referring to our indoctrination education system. And then, of course, the rhyming word knowledge. Interesting stuff. Serpentine name of places. Now, this is interesting because you find wherever these colonizers went, they, I don't know, kind of stamped everything with serpentine names. And there's a lot of them as you start going through all of them. I mentioned Kali earlier. We talk about the god, the Kali Yuga cycles, talk about the god Kali, and we also have California as one. But here we've got Cologne, Colombia, which is a part of France, Colorado, Columbia, Columbine. Now, it's not an accident that there was those awful, what looked like MK Ultra mind control kids going to Columbine and just gunned down a whole bunch of their fellow students. It's called Columbine for a reason, and that particular school was chosen, I reckon, because of its name. And, of course, California. And then Columbia, who's often referenced as Venus Columbia, and is the icon of Columbia TriStar Pictures. But again, the light, notice always this light theme, lots of clouds as well, right? And standing at the top of a pyramid. This is no accident. And Columbia, as I say, is an archetypal mother goddess figure, and takes on many different names and incarnations as she's reinterpreted through different cultures. And then, of course, Colus turns up in Columbus. Christopher Columbus's real name was Christopher Collins, and he is alleged to have discovered America by accident. But I mean, we've just had, as I think as early as yesterday, news coming out of the States that they found Roman coins there predating Columbus. So that's blown out the water. And I myself have been to the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, which was built before Christopher Columbus apparently sailed to America. And yes, it does have aloe and sweet corn carved into the beautiful carvings in this beautiful cathedral. And those were typically indigenous to America. So they knew of the terrain of America, at the very least, these secret societies, because I believe that was actually built by the Sinclair family, who were Masons. And it's one of the most beautiful cathedrals I've ever been in, actually very old and quite an eerie place. So Columbus was a secret society initiate and was given the maps by Henry the Navigator. Supposedly, he got lost and found America by accident. But why they use the name Columbus is so that people who read the stories of Columbus and were initiated would understand the truth of the nature of what was going on, and that this is a rewriting of history, and that they're taking over and colonizing and starting the new world, so to speak. So Columbus was a code name used so that the initiated would understand the code of colonization. And of course, the cooler root turns up in Dracula. The story of Dracula was written by Freemason Bram Stoker. And for those of you who have been following the Hampstead Whistleblowers Kids case, there is a famous pub called the Spaniards Inn in Hampstead where Bram Stoker used to sit and write this particular novel, not too far away from Highgate Cemetery, which is where the story of Dracula is largely set. Lots of nasty things going on in Highgate Cemetery. But basically, the story of Dracula, written by Bram Stoker, was based originally on a real character being Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler. He had a penchant for being rather cruel. And, of course, Vlad Dracula, because he was a member of the Order of the Dragon, which he became a hereditary member due to the fact that his father was a member of the Order of the Dragon. Now, as I spoke about earlier, Columba is the meaning of dove. And this is why they often at ceremonies will release doves, white doves, the dove of peace, all symbolic of the dragon. They're using it as a symbol to mask a representative of the dragon, to lock down the Ophidian vibration that keeps us so in fear. Doves is the Christianic dragonology depiction of a much deeper allegory. It's a multi-layered allegory. And in fact, doves are often referenced as the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. And we get into why this is important now, because both of these have etymological, both spirit and both ghost, provable etymological roots to the dragon, as I shall demonstrate. Spirit comes from the word spiro or spiro, which means dragon. Spirit and gin, we spoke about gin earlier. Alcohol was initially developed and has always been used for thousands of years in rituals and invocations and for possession and communication with external entities through intoxication. I have actually seen someone get so drunk that they started speaking like an ancient Greek dialect because they had just become possessed with something else. And, speaking in tongues was quite something to observe. Spiro is actually the root of the word spiral. Okay, again, we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit, but spiral, important. We spoke a bit on the round table about spirals and Fibonacci sequence. And then, of course, Spiro is the root of sprite, goblin or fairy-like or dragon-like being. Spook, which can be a ghost, or they talk about spooks in espionage, to be a spy. And spy, ironically, also comes from the Spiro root. And spook alludes to ghost. So this actually is sort of a double allegory, the word spook. And then, of course, we have spit, which is what snakes commonly do. And then the spirals on the top of the columns. These are everywhere. I don't know how many times I have seen these guys sitting on top of columns, but basically you find columns everywhere, and most likely on top of them you'll find capitals with Ionic, the Ionic period in them. This is a sprite, okay? The root word spiro refers to a creature that is considered to be relegated to folklore or fairy tale. And I tried to get to really sort of, I don't know what I would consider to be a sprite. I've never really actually seen one, but this is when I Googled sprite, kind of what I found. All right, spirit and spook. Spirit and spook also references ghosts. Okay, so we've spoken about the origins of spirit and spook. So spirit and spook references ghosts. Now, this is where it gets a bit funky, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Try not to get too distracted by that for the moment, yeah? This is the word evolution we have going on here, okay? Good, obviously, when you talk about good and God, you can talk about evil and devil, and see how that's a natural transliteration. But good, God, God into goat, goat into ghost, into host, into go, into gone, and to dragon. And we talk about theophania, just disappearance, gone, like they go. So you've got some of these themes playing out here, which we've already spoken about. And goat worship, the goat of Mendes, there's a lot of this sort of thing going on, but this is actually a marble carving of the god Pan actually having sex with a goat. And this is quite a popular, we've seen this quite a few depictions of this coming out of places like Pompeii, miniatures of this, and much bigger ones, life-size looking ones as well. People seem to like this particular carving in the Roman times, but it is depicting a deeper allegory, and we will go into that when we start getting into ritual. But remember this picture, a little frightening, but it tells a lot. Okay, we spoke about fanes earlier being the root of phantom. Phantom comes from the root phanes, a god of the Greek pantheon. Now, I want to point out here some very interesting things about Fane. Cloven hooves, all right, wrapped in a serpent, wings, okay, it's got a serpent coming above his head here. It's got what looks like an egg at the top there because he's born from the cosmic egg, and then surrounded in the symbols of the zodiac. Now, Mithra is often depicted like this. In fact, I think there's very little difference between Mithra and Phanes, other than they were given different roots, different names at different times for remarketing or rebranding purposes, obviously to mask the true origins of what's going on. As we spoke about, theophania, all right, talks about a Greek word for the appearance of God out of seemingly nowhere, a theophany of God. And this is, for example, how a spirit will suddenly materialize or incarnate, or there'll be seemingly empty space which will suddenly fill up with a flesh and blood entity. Okay, and this is what theophany is referring to, or for that matter, the disappearance, the disincarnation of whatever being or entity that is. So you've got God and you've got Fane. Fane obviously alluding to that particular quality within phantoms, which is obviously to appear and disappear like ghosts. And then Fane is etymologically cognitive with theme and fey. Let's explain to you what theme and fey are all about. Theme is the goddess of the Greek pantheon who is the personification of Fame. So when you talk about the Faustian pact and selling your soul to the devil or selling your soul for fame, might not be too far off. Then, of course, fae are also known as fairies or fair folk. And again, this is the best representation I could find of that sort of thing. But even when I did find a fairy representation, interesting to notice the solar halo, which is common amongst these etheric depictions of these beings. And then, of course, the word fair is etymologically, and it rhymes, I should say, and etymologically similar to pair and pair. Pair as in a twinning or two, and then, of course, pear, the fruit. And the pear turns up, it's a masking of the dragon. Pear turns up in amazing heraldic depictions. It's amazing how many of them I could find. It just seems to be actually hundreds of them. So what is it all about? Okay, beg your pardon. We will actually get into a little bit more about the pear and pior. If we spoke about the parlor root earlier, that's where the pear sort of fits in, and I'll tie that in just to mention that there. Okay, first the caduceus shows, for example, what becomes quite common in the theming of dragons, and that is the twinning or the twined or the twisted or the paired serpents or the spiral serpents. Again, it's all the same sort of allegory that we've got coming in, the spiraling serpents, and it's normally always done in a pair of spiraling serpents. So the Kaduki is the best depiction of the pair of spiraling serpents that is very commonly used. In fact, it's a modern day depiction of the medical industry. Apples and pears are words which, as I spoke about earlier, synonymous with each other. We talk about going up the apples and pears being the stairs. The word pear is cognizant, as I said, with pior, which is the Akkadian noun for snake. I beg your pardon. I don't know why that went all the way back there. But let's see. I seem to have somehow... There we go. Apples and pears. Whoa. It feels like someone's just taken over my computer. Bear with me, folks. So snakes and apples, right? Snakes and apples are, you know, where have we heard this one before? Snakes and apples just seem to come up everywhere. Apples come up everywhere. Even in pre-Christianic mythology, we talk about the golden apples in the Greek mythology. And this is something we'll cover off a lot, is fruit, apples, pears. As I said, apples and pears inextricably linked, but snakes and apples. Interesting. As I said earlier, we keep coming back to the story of creation, the story of Genesis, as we've already spoken about. These words keep coming back. The paradise of Eden, okay? Para being in the paradise of Eden. So this creational myth, again, we talk about this dragon gods in so many different cultures being the creators of humanity. And we keep coming back to this creational myth in the Christianic myth, or I should say, in the dragonology of the Christianic sense. Even though the name Eve evolved from Eva and Ava, which came from, as I spoke about earlier, Afa, which means viper in the Middle Eastern languages. So even the name Eve is a serpent word. And you talk about how we transliterate and evolve language, that evolved into Ave Maria, and Ava is cognizant with Ava, as in Ave Maria being how the Virgin Mary is typically referenced in Spanish or sometimes in Latin. And then we spoke last week about Saint Marina slaying the dragon, and here it comes in again. The marine theme starts to tie together Maria, Marina, and Mary, which are all rooted in the Latin word mare and mer, which in turn reference ocean or sea. So the marine aquatic theme starts to come in. Dragons are inextricably linked with the four elements: earth, air, wind, and fire. And this is very evident. You always find dragons being linked with oceans, wells, and seas. Mer, the marine theme root word mer, forms the root word of mermaid. And of course, I've used a depiction of Melusine here, one of the more commonly known mermaid stories of European folklore and tradition. And of course, mer then begins the beginning of the name Merovingian, which when I go through and do some more dragonology presentations, we'll get into the Merovingian bloodline and why that is important. So try to remember that one, Mer and Merovingian, or Merovi. This is also very important to remember because the V becomes De Vere. It actually comes from the De Vere bloodline. Right. Here's where we show you how L, Il, and L have all transliterated, but ultimately mean the same thing. We spoke earlier about El Surat, I beg your pardon, the Surat al-Jinn. So it's the verses of the royal jinn or the holy jinn, or so many words for it. But El is typically, we start here, commonly known from a lot of the research done by people like Jordan Maxwell as the beginning root syllable of Elohim, as mentioned in the Bible. And basically, it's derived from the old Aramaic word meaning light. And this is evident in the English word electricity, because when you think of electricity, you think of light. So again, the light theme comes back in there. And of course, L turns up in hello, elves, again, like fairies, elves, sprites, all associated with the same sort of, we think they're different little creatures. And no, they're all referencing the dragon, different ways of referencing one creature, and that is the dragon. 11, they love this particular number. Elite, elect, and of course eel, which is in fact a electric water snake. So how many symbols have we got there? The electric, which is the light, and a water snake. Okay, so it's the water and then snake, and it's L, but it's an eel. That one always blows me away. All right, the angels. The L root is present in the names of the biblical angels, such as Gabriel, Azazel, Raphael, and Michael. I'm sure there's more of them, but just to give you an idea, you always find the biblical angels with L at the end, or, for example, at the beginning of a name, sometimes as well. So Elohim or Elo is the Hebrew abbreviated, I beg your pardon, is abbreviated in Hebrew as El and in Latin as Il. And the Il root turns up in words such as illuminate and illuminati. And of course, illuminate is cognizant with light. And then, of course, a luxsphere, meaning light bringer, is the root of Lucifer. Then we go into the L root. Il transliterates into the Arabic El, which is evident in words such as Allah, which is etymologically similar to Pala, which is the root of Palestine. As I said, these serpent root words turn up a lot in places. Put your mark on them with a name. Okay. Occult. The reason I wanted to bring that up is actually, if I go back, you'll notice I have been sneakily actually not mentioning, but Illuminati, we start having the eye symbolism coming up. Over here, this is the Arabic depiction of the eye or hand of Fatima, okay? And the all-seeing eye symbolism comes up in every culture, in every religion. Okay, so here we go. Occult actually means that which is hidden and is cognizant with oculus. Again, you got this kulu root coming in here, and you've got the cult root coming into occult. Kulu, which of course comes from the kolu, collar, that root. So oculus meaning eye. And then we have the eye symbolism, which in biblical accounts, dragons were referenced as the watchers, and often the heptagon angels or seraphim angels are depicted with eyes in their wings. And this is actually a mosaic, a very old mosaic, but you'll notice they've got eyes in the wings, and I've seen many such depictions in ancient artworks and old scripts and manuscripts. So the biblical accounts of dragons reference these guys as the watchers. Decipher the deception. The Semitic noun nahash or nakash, meaning serpent, shares the additional meaning to decipher. Okay? Nahash, in its shortened form, is written as NHSH. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it indicates the verb to deceive. And incidentally, the words deceive and decipher are from the same family of words. And what you've got here is, for example, in Sweden, you'd have them carve, with all sorts of runes. This is an old rune stone of the Norse traditions. And they've carved dragons onto it. So in conclusion of episode 2, as can be seen through our exploration of dragonology, the evidence of the dragon exists the evidence of the dragon exists in written codified form, But the more interesting theme that starts to emerge is the duplicitous nature of the dragon and how openly it's been recorded whilst concealing its existence. I seem to have jumped again. Dragons hide behind occult ritual whilst not wishing to be found, whilst embedding themselves symbolically into language. Indeed, the very essence of language loans itself to symbolism, which can be deciphered to reveal the deception of the dragon and the control and influence which is interwoven into the very fabric of our existence. Through language, literature, art, architecture, music, theatre and sport, and many other popular cultural aspects, we can actually find the dragon intricately interwoven into all of it. So that is where we're probably going to go with it next week, is climbing into the cultural aspects of things. So in episode 3, we climb into theatre, sport, ritual, and all the things that we sort of put auxiliary to ourselves for entertainment, which have ultimately been sort of developed to distract us, indoctrinate us, give us something else to focus our intention and energy into, which ultimately gives energy into that Ophidian vibration. So episode 3, there's a lot of time changes, so please do take note of this. 4 p.m. New York time, 9 p.m. London and Morocco time, 10 p.m. Central European and South African time, and of course 6 a.m. Sydney time the following day, Friday morning. And of course you can catch all the updates on the times being done weekly on our broadcast guide available on the homepage of CCN. And if you miss anything, all shows on CCN are available on our archive. There is the archive icon on our homepage, which is consciousconsumernetwork.tv. And of course, guys, I just want to say a big thank you to Jorge for creating my beautiful artwork for Dragonology. We are currently trying to find sponsorship for the publication of the illustrated encyclopedia of dragons called Dragonology. Initially, I wrote the South African Guide to the Global Conspiracy as a trilogy. Part 1 was completed. Part 2 was meant to be called The Eye of the Dragon, but it actually evolved into 2 documentaries called Chasing the Dragon and now this Dragonology series, as well as now turning into an encyclopedia. But we really can't do it any justice without actually including all the full color illustrations, and full color printing is really, really expensive. And we'd like to get this project done so that we can have an updated version of mythology, because, you know, not being funny or anything, I bought this out last week, this book, which I wanted to show to everybody. Mythology and Illustrated Encyclopedia by Richard Cavendish and a whole bunch of PhD people who really have written all of this stuff from the point of view of the dominant culture and all of it. I mean, even on the back page, you can, the very back cover, you can see, you know, half serpent, half human-like beings. So it's there in your face, yet they don't actually ever tie together the fact that it is the common root of the dragon that ties all of history together. And we have to look at history through the perspective of the dragon to see how the global perspective ties in together. What they've done is they've compartmentalized it into regions and get us to think of these different things under different titles, different names, be it Naga, be it Jinn, be it Ifrit, whatever it is. It's always under different names, and thus we've not understand our true history due to the fact it's continually rewritten, continually relabeled, epic rebranding going on. But you only have to look at the etymology and follow some of the roots through to really find out what's going on. And we'd like to demonstrate that through the Encyclopedia of Dragons. So guys, please, sponsorship is required as always, and it does take a lot to run Conscious Consumer Network. So feel free to go to our donations page and or click on the donations heart on our homepage and contribute to our work. We'd like to thank you here from CCN headquarters for your interest and attention, and thank you for indulging me in my passion of dragons, and we hope to see you guys next week. Until then, keep searching. My name is Mel V, and I hope you have a good evening.